folks. Thanks for joining. Yeah, as Paul said, my name's Keith Instone. Happy to be here with my friends at TorCHI. We're going to talk about spins on user experience. So we'll talk about different definitions, different ways to look at user experience. I want this to be very discussion-y and so on. It looks like we have 15 or so folks here, so we'll be stopping for questions and going along the way. I have lots more material. If you guys are really interested in one of these spins, we'll go down that path. So in general, what is user experience? It's lots of things, lots of crazy things. If you're in the industry, you might be dealing with talking to lots of folks, having discussions around different aspects of user experience. So I want to sort of have like an engaging format. If we were in person, when I've done this in person, we're like sitting around a table and we're just having a chat. So we'll be using some Zoom polling to try to get you guys engaged, and we don't have too big of a crowd, so we should be able to have a Q&A. Really the goal is to get us talking about user experience, perhaps in some new ways that you're not used to talking about, or just to help you sort of tease some things apart so that when you have a discussion with a manager, with a colleague, you can be a little bit more informed and get into a little bit of the details instead of feeling like you're just talking in circles with folks. Let me get to, there we go. So let's start. We're going to be using some Zoom polling. So let me launch a poll and we'll give everybody a minute to answer the poll. So let's make sure that there should be a window that popped up somewhere that you can answer one of these 4 questions. Yes, you're excited for the presentation to begin. Whatever, you're just sort of here because you have to be, or no, let's not start yet. My cat's bothering me. So we got 11 folks. That's just about everybody. So cool. So let me make sure I know how to use Zoom polling. So sharing the results so everybody can see the results okay. 11 out of 11, excited, ready to go. Is that good? Somebody give me one thumbs up. Okay, or a clap. Thank you, Alona. Okay, so let's keep going. So for folks that were at TorCHI last month, Dan Rosenberg did a great presentation on semantic interaction design, and he made a point early on to talk about user-centered design as a process overall, showing this slide, and then he spent the rest of the time talking about semantic interaction design as a method, right? So again, he was reinforcing some of the different spins as I've talked to different folks. We'll tease that apart a little bit, the difference between a process and a method. And the other part that I love about Dan's book, he entitled it UX Magic, right? As an inside joke, right? Knowing that a lot of people think of user experience as magic because they don't understand it. Just right, somebody does some UX magic and suddenly we make more money, or suddenly people quit complaining about our application, things like that. So he's using part of this, it's become a buzzword and a lot of people don't understand it. And so he just turned that into a joke for his book. So because for us that do it all the time, we know that it's not really magic, because maybe we're the magicians, right? So what I'm going to talk about are 14 different spins on user experience. These are the 14 listed here on the left. Why these 14? Just because I got tired after I got to 14. As I was talking to different folks, reading different magazines and things, it's like, wait a second here. Somebody's talking about user experience as a practice, and that's different when I talk about it as an industry. When I gave a talk earlier at a conference, I had a graphic facilitator, so she drew this awesome picture of what I babbled on about at that conference. So apparently, there when we were talking about mindset with the group, I said, being comfortable being wrong. That must, part of a user experience mindset is being comfortable being wrong. So I must have said that during it because she wrote it down. But these are some of the things that we'll talk about: profession, tool set, digital transformation. So if you've been listening to podcasts and live stream, you'll see other folks, again, talking about some of these different spins. In the upper left-hand corner was a podcast I was on where we really just complained that user experience was turning into a buzzword. It had lots of confusing meetings with folks on our team. In the lower left-hand corner, again, a podcast, we're talking about user experience and design as a team. What is it like having a team? I've seen folks talk about it as a mindset and methodology, right? So you'll hear other folks talking about these different spins as well, right? So that's pretty common, but you'll also see things like this Medium article, right? There's a gazillion Medium articles. I just picked one that to use as an example as you're reading different things. This Medium article was titled, How to Land a Career in UX Design with Zero Qualifications. Okay, so again, some clickbait there. It has some good advice for somebody who isn't familiar with what we do. Talked about some of the key skills and the processes and the teams that you would work with, how you should find a community of practice to hang out with, and so on. But there was one person that commented is like, yeah, this does a disservice to professional designers, right? So for folks that have been doing it for 30 years and have devoted their career to it as a profession, we like to think that, sure, we want new people learning it and joining us. But it's not quite fair to say that you don't need any qualifications to get started, right? So, and again, she had good advice on how to get started. She one part that I don't think she quite understood. She said, UX design was not a thing when I was at university, so it's not here to stay, right? And not really understanding that it's not necessarily a degree like library science or architecture or things where you have to get a degree in it or else you can't get a job in it. So that part wasn't it. And again, a funny comment about UX design has been going on ever since people have been making weapons, for example, right? So, I think they use an example of King Arthur was a UX designer because he invented a round table for his knights. Okay, fine. So we could have a discussion if King Arthur was a UX designer. So let's do another poll. What is your opinion of the term UXer? So let me start another poll here. If I can figure out how to do it. So let me launch the poll. So take a second to look through. I proudly call myself a UXer, okay for bootcamp grad, but not very professional, better than UX UI, terrible, confused, nonsense, waste of time. So we'll wait for another few seconds for folks to answer, because we're going to pause and we're going to stop and talk about your answers here. So we've got 9 out of 11, 10 out of 11. Well, okay, we got all 11. Thank you very much. So let me end the poll here and share the results. And this will be where some of you may want to come off of mute and start chiming in. So what did we get for answers? We got 4 people to say they probably call themselves a UXer, and 4 people confused, designer or researcher, okay? 2 people said it's not very professional, and 1 person said nonsense, okay? So who's the 1 person that said nonsense? UX is not a person. Do you want to come off of mute and say why you said that?
That would be me. This is Dan.
Yes, Dan.
And I was afterwards. I was debating whether I should have said that or that it cheapens what we do. I think a few things actually apply, and it's a bit of a personal bias in that I'm trying to avoid as much as possible, beyond job postings and my resume, using the acronym UX, because I think it's become meaningless, which I'm not going to start ranting, but
right, yep.
I think to have a more fulsome discussion about the process, I think we need to use different words that describe better what we do.
So you're perfect. You're in the right place, because I'm hoping to have discussions around when it's a process, maybe, right? Again, when I was young, it was user-centered design. That was what we called the process.
Yeah.
But now it's also human-centered design. Is that better or worse?
Yeah,
and unfortunately, some people call UX the design process.
Yeah,
yes.
I think everyone, including non-practitioners, have an idea of what UX is. And so you're sort of reinforcing their beliefs unless you try to disabuse them of things that are not correct in terms of the process.
Good, thank you. How about somebody that was that answered confused? What can you explain why you chose the confused choice? Any of those four want to speak up?
Sure, I can share. Um, so this is kind of the first time I actually heard of the word.
Okay.
That's why I was confused. I wasn't sure if I use this word, would someone think I'm a user or a researcher? But for me, like, I don't have any issue with the word UX as long as, like, a lot of the times if I say I'm an UX or I'm a UXer, I feel like the people immediately associate, they understand what is it that I do. And so if the purpose of the word is to communicate, I feel it gets that across. In that sense, I don't have an issue. Like if I say, oh, I'm an anthropologist and I work in tech, and people, they don't really understand it. But if
Right.
I say I'm a UXer, they immediately connect with me.
Right.
And I feel, yes, I like that we're also having a critical perspective on this. Like, I think understanding the historical meaning of words is important. But in this case, like, I was confused. What would people perceive if I'd used that? Because this is the first time I thought of it that way.
Perfect. Yeah. So that was part of that. Part of the things that could happen when we come up with jargon like this, right? So let me go ahead and stop sharing that. And so this actually came from a post on the UXPA, User Experience Professionals Association Facebook group. Somebody posted, what is your opinion of the term UXer back in December? The vast majority of their responses were, ugh, it's awful, okay? And a couple of them, I don't have a strong opinion. But they were more interesting to me than their answer were the 43 comments about it. So in those 43 comments were things like user experience doesn't make sense because user experience is the impression that people have in their head. It's not a person, right? There were discussions around, oh, this is good. It could be a good name for everybody on our team, right? On our team could be UXers and then versus marketing people or something like that. But then you started to get some more critical things where people were saying like, a UXer has some skills, but an experienced designer understands the theory, right? So if you're a UXer, you're a beginner, you don't quite know what you're doing, but we have a different label for people who know what they're doing, right? So implied in that. Of course, somebody called UX designers mindless pixel pushers, pixel movers, right? So you started to get some really nasty things. And then side discussions are around, like you said, but did you mean UX designer or did you mean UX researcher? And somebody said, you mean there's a difference? And again, in some organizations, there's not a big difference between designers and research, and other ones it's very important. And then of course, people started saying, well, shouldn't we regulate this? Should you be allowed? And of course, it always ends with, why are we arguing about this? I got too much work to do, right? So let's just sort of encapsulate a lot of those types of decisions or discussions. So I'm going to show some of these different spins. Did I skip one? Oh, yeah, I skipped one. So I'm going to hop on over. So the nature of the spins that I developed in order to foster discussion is I actually made a little spinner because I'm a very poor JavaScript programmer, but I'm good enough to do that. You do a spin, it'll be a quote. So like in this case, if you spin process, it says, we need more time to determine actual user needs instead of just designing from the product feature list, right? So this would be an example of when somebody says that, they're talking about the process part of it, right? To differentiate when they're talking about a job role or a methodology or something. And so then below that, I propose a statement. User experience is a human-centered process with steps like discovery, analysis, conceptual design, and evaluation used for business and social impact, right? Now, you may think, oh, that's an awesome statement around process, but hopefully you're going to say, it's only half good, right? And so part will be to then, we can have some discussions around this part of, is user experience a good name for a process? Maybe human-centered design is a better name. And then I purposely added business and social impact because I want people to have discussions around, I see a lot of things of user experience is great, it'll help your company make more money. Well, I do a lot of work with government agencies and nonprofits, and that's not our goal, right? Our goal is to increase voting, increase voting across the community, okay? In which case we have very different goals. So let me hop on over and do some spins. So And if you really want to be risky, then we could actually just spin and do things in a completely random order, because this is a completely random number generator. So we'll take a risk here. So I'm going to do a spin and we'll pick one. Oh, methodology. Okay. So in this case, let's think about user experience as a methodology. So a body of techniques and rules about how to use them that govern our specialty, right? So methodology, right? So we can talk about methodology. That sounds like process, but it's a little bit different. So we'll get into that one. We'll do one more spin and then we'll hop back to sort of give you the flavor, and then we'll go a little bit. Oh, change agent. So I was just talking to somebody in Australia where I'm going to do this presentation next, and it was mostly around how user experience professionals are often acting as change agents. So, right, if you hear a statement, our UX work will not succeed if we don't change the culture around here, right? Then it's like, uh-oh, if you're not some sort of change agent, you're not going to be successful with whatever you're trying to do. So those are examples of some of the different spins. We'll go through in a little bit of a normal order. Let's see if I can get back to the full share mode. Okay. So one disclaimer on the spins. I myself don't agree that all of them are valid, but these are the things that I'm hearing, right? So just because Keith says change agent is a spin doesn't mean that it is really a spin, but it's something good to talk about and to try to encourage discussion. And it's really for around you to figure out which spins might be useful for you to use back at your organization, or which ones to avoid. Okay, so let's do this one. Okay, so let's pretend COVID-19 has triggered a digital transformation in your organization. You are part of the leadership team, which is creating a plan to make this initiative successful. You get to focus on user experience, plans, and resources. Okay, what are you going to do? So we'll spin the wheel. Let me go back to that one. I can spin it again. So let's see which one comes up. Okay. So let's say for your plan for your company, we're going to talk about user experience as an industry, right? So as a collection of business establishments that act as a whole. So what might that mean to your company as you're working on this COVID digital transformation plan? If we think of user experience as an industry, what impact might that have on your plan or what you do? Anybody want to suggest something?
Are users going to like it, or will they use it, or will it be useful at all? Few questions that pop up in my mind.
Okay, good, thank you. So for industry, one thing that's important is that you might be working on a COVID-19 plan for your organization, for your company, right? But if user experience really is an industry, then there's lots of other companies that will be doing the same thing, right? So maybe your company could go check in with ACM SIGCHI or whatever, right? One of these professional organizations, and see what other companies are doing it. Or maybe there's a lot of industry consortiums, right? If you're in a financial services industry, there's other banks that you could be part of a consortium of, and then you could think about how to share user experience COVID-19 plans across different companies, right? So if you think about an industry, it really makes you think outside of your company or your organization walls. Let's do one more spin and then we'll get on to the next one because we're getting short on time. As a practice, okay? So actually, that one's not as interesting. Okay, strategy, here we go. So if you're going to think of user experience as a strategy, it's really thinking of it as a vision or a plan, sort of like you'd have a marketing strategy or a branding strategy, okay? Right, so that could be part of your COVID-19 plan, is how you're going to improve the whole user experience for all of your users across the whole company, just like you'd have a product management plan. So let's do that. So let me go back and hit the first one here. Okay, so here's some of the ways that I'm going to group the the different spins. One, we're going to talk about user experience as an impression, sort of the core one. And then I've grouped together processes, methodologies, tools, and skill sets, sort of the activities that we do as user experience folks. Then another group around the organizational capabilities. And then finally, some things like industry, where we're actually thinking about user experience outside of our own organizational boundaries. But first, I want to cover it as a buzzword that sort of drives this. For a lot of folks, this is part of the problem. And so one common example that I hear is the phrase UX/UI, right? So when I talk to people, I hear, various folks, like, they use that phrase. I say, tell me why you use that phrase. What are the origins of it? And I tend to get 3 different answers. One answer is, I don't know what either term means. I'm just passing it along, right? I'm an HR person and somebody said we need to hire 5 of these people, and that's it, okay? Other times I get a little bit sort of an honest answer. We know that we're just hiring a UI person, but if we put UX in front of it, we get more applicants, or it sounds better, or we get more respect, or whatever, right? But when you look at the job description, it's just 95% UI design things, right? And it's like, well, this person doesn't do any user research, for example. But every once in a while I hear this, well, that slash really should be a plus. And it's really this T-shaped person. They're going to do both, right? They're going to be a generalist and they're going to do a little bit of user research and a whole lot of UI design, right? And so that one seems like an okay, again, when I was younger, we called those folks information architects, right? Then that word came out of favor. And so this is sort of the current jargon for a generalist, in my view. Any thoughts about UX as a buzzword? If some other ones jump out at you? Okay. So, time for another poll. Let me go get this one set up. Okay, so here's another poll. A user experience is an impression someone gets when interacting with what? And you can only pick one. Okay, we've got 7 votes in. One more to go. Thank you. And I'll share the results. What are you going to predict? Products and services, 7 votes and a system 4. So nobody said websites, which is good. That's the old, there's a lot of old definitions that say user experience is only about websites, technology, company, people. Okay, interesting. Not too surprising, given this crowd. So products and services system. Does somebody want to chime in on maybe products and services versus system? Because it seems like those are the top 2 answers, but some people chose one or the other. What made you pick one versus the other?
I picked products and services, but really when I didn't look far enough down the list.
Okay. So because it was 3rd on the list and not 4th.
Yes. I think a system includes product and services. So I think system's broader. So I would like to change my answer.
Okay. But a lot of other folks chose products and services, so it's not all bad.
So I used to be a interaction designer and user experience designer at a service design company, and we would often put up this slide that showed user experience design being encompassed within service design. So I think it's this Venn diagram, and maybe you're being a little bit more precise by saying it's maybe just the system, but they cover both.
Yep. It's again, I think either version is pretty good, right? Compared to using something like websites, which will give people the wrong impression that user experience doesn't have anything to do with a mobile application or a desktop application.
Keith,
yes.
I guess the label products and services doesn't include I guess, internal systems used by employees, I guess.
Does it or doesn't it, right? So yeah, because again, like products usually implies products that customers buy.
Right.
But I've been to some product conferences, and the majority of people are like, I remember hanging out with people from Home Depot, and they were product managers for Home Depot, but it was all applications that Home Depot employees used. It wasn't for Home Depot customers. So I think that's a variation from company to company.
Yeah.
So good. Let me stop sharing and move on to the next one. So for my spin, as for discussion item, I said an user experience is an impression someone gets when interacting with products, services, spaces, brands, systems, and organizations, right? And I purposely added lots of extra mumbo jumbo after that to talk about what would, the user experience of spaces, right? Whether it's a virtual space, like something with Oculus Rift, or whether it's a physical space that has Internet of Things embedded in it, brands, and so on. So I added some extra things just to talk about, what would it mean for, to talk about user experience with people interacting with spaces, right? I also included the ISO definition for you, Alona. So, right. So just as reference, right? If you're not familiar, there is an official standard definition, and it says it's a person's perceptions, responses, perceptions and responses resulting from the use and or anticipated use of a product, system, or service. So they cheated. They put product, system, and service all together, right?
I have a comment on that if you're interested.
Please.
And I have been doing a poll recently because I had not been using the ISO reference in my teaching. And I went and asked all my colleagues at University of Toronto, at least, saying, hey, do you use the ISO in your teaching?
Right.
And the only person who said, I used to do it, but now I don't because I was called old-fashioned.
Right.
Was a prof. And the others said no. So, and this all came out because I had an exchange with Rolf Molich, because I was talking about which heuristics should we be using, and I happened not to mention the ISO, and he just like came down and, oh yeah, and then I went looking, going like, why don't we use it?
Right.
Oh, there's my circle back to.
Right.
And by the way, it's a brand new 2019, 2020 version of all this. So.
Right. I haven't read the newest version. My only version is a slightly older one. I can't quite tell what's changed. So I don't think the definition itself changed, but I think other things did. Mm-hmm. So another question or comment?
I was going to say, if it's any consolation, this is the only definition that I have in a presentation that I present on UX. So it's this one.
Thank you. Thank you. So, and so what, go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say, I do like that one very much. It's probably the only one I can recall seeing that includes the concept of the responses as well. It's also the responses are part of the experience, not just the input side. Right.
And so what I did was actually figuring that this group would like to geek out on some of these different definitions of it versus talking about the strategy or the practice side. So I compiled some different definitions of this as user experience as a phenomenon, right? As a thing that happens in our users' heads. And so the first three across the top are sort of all similar versions of, they're talking about a person or someone who's having an impression, they're interacting with a series of things, right? Again, versions, as you say, someone or person. The ISO uses perceptions and responses. Somebody on Wikipedia wrote emotions and attitudes, right? So I think there's, slight variations on that. What do we call the thing that happens that triggers it in the user's heads? The next column is sort of the verb that happens. What is the user doing to trigger this? I use interacting. ISO uses the word use or anticipated use. I think that's cheating. Since we have user experience, you can't really use the word use when you define user experience to me. So to me, interacting just seemed like a little bit more richer word, right? As opposed to use, definitely not like sitting on a couch just watching it, right? But interacting in some way. And then, what are all the words that we use to describe the thing that they're interacting with? So that's the first section. The next section are ones that really tried to skim down this definition as little as possible. So it's like the user's perception of a system, right? That's one definition of it, which like, oh, that's like the fewest words possible, but I'm not sure if some things are missing. And then the bottom section are ones that actually I have different problems with in different ways. And so one of them is the Nielsen-Norman group one, which is the most commonly one. If you go out and look for definition of user experience, most folks will be referencing this one. Does anybody else have a problem with this one? I'm interested in some of your comments before I tell you why I don't like it. So again, they're talking about end users and all aspects of their interaction with a company, its services, and its products.
Well,
What
let's
if
see.
it's,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, what if it's not a company and it's an individual, and they have a product or something they have created and they want people's opinion about it?
Yes. So again, I understand why they say the company, right? Because a lot of our work is with companies, but not all of them are, right? So I work with governments, and so we don't have a company and we don't have services, and we may have products, but they're slightly different. So
Does the end user limited to just the user is not the stakeholders? It's really narrow.
right. So end user is extremely narrow. We can decide whether that's good or bad, right?
And then the interaction component reduces all the, like, I actually have to touch it. What if I buy it, my kid uses it? Does that leave me out?
Right. So yeah. So what does it mean to interact?
I have a problem with the all aspects, because that is just meaningless.
Right.
It's just everything.
Right. So I compiled other ones that said all aspects, nearly everything, totality, sum total. And again, back, some of those were written in 2005 when we were still figuring it out. And so I understood the vagueness, but yeah, I've been trying to get the one that doesn't say it's everything in the world that goes into somebody's head, right? Or goes through somebody's head. So again, so there's some different things. And so for me, what's key is, another aspect of it is, like, once you're thinking of this as user experience as a phenomenon, right? Then you start to get to things like, well, how do we understand what people are thinking of our experiences that they have with us? And so you get things like the questionnaire that has a section on perspicuity. Is that how you say it? But right here in the middle, it's like, how easy or hard is it to learn the thing, right? I believe, right? But at least when you're focusing on this spin on user experience, you're then going to naturally get to questionnaires and rating scales. You're going to use Peter Morville's Honeycomb, if you've seen that one, which is nice because it starts to, in the early days, usability was the only attribute of the experience that we really talked about, even though we sort of, so he did this to help us start talking about findability, credibility, those other characteristics of the experience that matter. So good. And so for me, sort of as a conclusion, out of all these spins, there's 14 more different spins. One of my goals with my clients is to spend more time discussing this user experience as a noun, talking about our users' experiences instead of getting bogged down in all the other spins, right? Like, well, how big is our team going to be? How many steps is there going to be in our process? Are we going to do usability testing or not? Like, that's great, but if we don't, a lot of my clients just don't want to talk about this part of UX, right? They just want to get down to doing it because they got an app that they have to launch in a month, right? So, and thanks, Dan, for the claps, right? So again, this to me is the big problem with all the buzzwords and everything, is because we've sort of lost track of this one thing that matters. Without this one spin, then who cares about all the rest? And then to get into more detail, like you asked, Paul, is then I usually get my clients to go one level deeper. Let's not talk about our user's experience, but sometimes we want to talk about the customer experience or the potential customer experience. We're going to talk about the employee experience, which again, for me, as a designer, like, I design very differently when it's an employee versus when it's a customer, right? There's different goals, different processes I can use, different methods. And then of course, depending on the application, it might be, if we're designing things for doctors, then let's call it the doctor's experiences, right? As opposed to this generic user. Let's be as specific as we can. I was talking to one client, and we actually started talking about the dog's user experience, because this was somebody at an automobile manufacturer, and they were making trucks, and they were actually designing the back seat of the truck for dogs, right? To how easy is it for dogs to get in and get out, and how safe are the dogs? So I don't know if we have any psychology on what dogs experience when they're riding in a truck versus, you know, what we have about humans, but you know, we could even talk about that one. And again, later you can check, we can talk about the chicken user experience. There's a link to something we could do that, but we don't have time today, but we could talk about chicken user experience. So that's sort of the first one. So if nothing else, we could stop now. That's the only spin that exists in the world for user experience, and we're all good to go. Unfortunately, there's some other spins that we should cover. So let me launch another poll. So here's another poll. It says, why do you do usability testing? And you can pick more than one. And we'll see if anybody's brave enough to say, I don't do it.
Then they get kicked out of the.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Accepted and reported.
So.
Someone has to pay for it, Alona.
No, they don't. We can just do it.
Oh, yeah.
Lost my children.
Okay, well, we got 9 out of 11. That looks pretty good. We'll wait. Okay, 10. There we go. Okay, so let's see what our results were. So everybody said they use it to get insights into user needs and requirements. That's awesome. Almost everybody said they use it to iteratively improve a design, right? That's, when I talk to folks, that's usually like when somebody goes to a boot camp, that's why they learn to do usability testing often, is just to make their design better, right? When I worked for a large company, then we often did usability testing to confirm the launch readiness, right? Just like, is it safe to go out? Because if there's a problem with this website, we could lose, you know, $100,000 a day, right? So is it ready to go or not? Benchmarking. And good to see 6 out of 11 folks say wake up leadership, right? Because sometimes there's nothing better than to have leaders watch a video of somebody actually struggling. And so the whole point of all of this is this one simple method called usability testing, of just finding representative users, giving representative tasks, and sitting back and watching. Extremely flexible method that we have, right? You can use it for multiple things. And so, but a lot of beginners don't get that, right? We have a more experienced crowd here, so this is good. But when I talk to beginners, they think usability testing is just one and only one thing, and they can't imagine that you might do it during a discovery session, or you might do it even before you know what your project is, right? Or that you'd be doing it, you know, all the time, right? So extremely flexible and powerful method. And so this group of spins is about process and methodology and tools. So we'll talk a little bit about tools. And then I also hear folks talking about user experience as a skill set, such as empathy and divergent thinking and sketching and so on. And they say, like, here's all the skills. Here's your user experience skill set. If you don't have these skills, then you're not going to be able to use the methodologies properly and follow the process. So there's a set of those. So when we talk about process, I think most of us think of it as a user experience process as some form of user-centered design. So there's a couple different examples here of, you know, a simple sort of iterative one, the double diamond. Folks have seen the double diamond process before. This here in the middle that goes up and down is called the goal-directed process. So I actually went out of my way to find a process that was sort of labeled user experience-ish, but wasn't called user-centered design. Anybody know where I got this goal-directed process from? That's project planning down to implementation support.
Cooper, about face.
Cooper, thank you. Right. So again, most of the time it's called user-centered design, sometimes goal-centered design. And then over on the right is Jesse James Garrett's Elements of User Experience. That in 2000, he basically, this is a process for doing websites and applications sort of together, and he called it a user experience. Right. So this might be the first time somebody said user experience as a process. Right. So So I think most of us are familiar with those. But when I talk to some folks, it's like, well, tease apart how does the methodology fit into the process, right? So basically, to me, methodology are the different things that we can do at different points in the process, right? So this is one example where they have the 6D process, and then in it, they talk about when you're in the discover stage, here are some of the methods that you can do, right? And some usability testing could be at multiple points in it, right? So, but the idea that we have lots of methods, and you've got to figure out when do you do methods at which part of the process, right? And for which project do you do it, in discovery phase? The next project, you may not have the time or the money, or it just may not be valuable to do some of these methods all the time, right? We can't do all the methods all the time. And then, of course, there's different ways to map methods. So here on the left is this Nielsen Norma Group one that says, oh, look at all these user research methods. Are you trying to learn something behavioral or something attitudinal? Are you trying to do it qualitatively or quantitatively, right? So we can have these complicated method maps, right, to figure out how to do it. And again, for, just for gathering requirements, there's lots of different methods that you can do for gathering requirements. And we can talk about the pros and cons of one method versus another, heuristic evaluation versus usability testing. When we talk about tools, so I'm sharing this user UX research tools map. So this company called User Interviews has made this really fancy subway map thing of all the tools, because again, the tools are exploding. We've just got a bunch of tools. So now it's hard to keep track of which tools are used for usability testing and which tools are used for transcription and so on. So we've started to sort of have this little industry of tool providers. Another website, UX Tools, categorizes a bunch of, they're actually UI design tools that they categorize. But again, if we think of user experience as a different tool set, I like to tease them apart, because for a lot of folks, they pick the tool and then that drives the method, and that might drive the process, right? But I want to really be good at UX, you've got to know the method regardless of the tool, because the tool might change tomorrow, right? Or the tool changes from one project to the next. So just sort of teasing apart, like what tool might we use for this project that's different than what method we might use. Now we might choose them together, but sometimes we need to discuss the tool separate from the method.
We had user interviews here a couple months ago.
Right. Oh, they were on they were at TorCHI. I missed that one. So
it's recorded. You can see it.
Okay. So again, a lot of the new folks, they just want to focus on the tools. So I was like, cool, I'm ready to talk about tools, but now we have to stop talking about tools because we have to talk about the methods and the processes and the skill sets. So again, user experience, these spins on how we do UX, they're all important. They always have been. Some folks I talk to, they tend to get into a rut, right? They always use the same process over and over again. And sometimes we have to change up the process for different reasons. Definitely sort of being able to mix and match the different methods depending on what your goals are is really important. We didn't get into skills here. We could have a discussion on skills later on if you want to. Right now, the big discussion around there is, do we democratize on skills and teach everybody how to be empathetic? Is that even possible, or is that desirable? So that could be a whole nother, we could have another hour discussion on democratizing user experience skills. So let's move on to a couple more and see how much more we can get in. So another poll to answer. Who does your UX team focus on? And Paul sort of spoiled this one a little bit already by asking it ahead of time, but that's okay. Seven, okay. One more to go if the last person wants to answer. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's show results. So we got a lot of folks working with current customers. That's not surprising. A pretty good majority working on employees with employee applications, employee things, that's good. customers. So who, learners. So yeah, we've got some folks in education focusing on learners. Nobody, so it's like nobody working for government, just happens to be here today, but that's okay. So who said someone else? Who wants to share the someone else?
That was me.
Yes.
And I picked a few of them just because I freelance, so I jump from project to project, so it's kind of hard to answer.
Yeah.
Right. In general.
Yes, and so yeah, so that's similar to me because it's like, is it Monday? Then it's current customers. If it's Tuesday, it's citizens, and if it's Wednesday, it's learners, right? So
my last project was a public facing website, and I had like 12 different audiences to deal with, so it was like the entire world, pretty much.
okay, were they sort of categorized like this, or was it more like fine-tuned, like 12 different types of customers?
It was they were definitely learners. There were some business or collaboration partners. This is a nonprofit. It was a nonprofit.
Okay.
And then there were customers of varying types and different kind of sort of customer type relationships. So yeah, it was all over the place.
Okay, good, thank you. So let me, so the next set of spins are around what I would call user experience as an organizational capability. It's around a user experience team or a strategy or change or different mindsets that your organization has. So let's go through some more of those. So user experience as a team, this is probably it's probably the one that I hear the most about, people talking about user experience team. This encompasses what sort of roles should we have on our team, user researcher versus product designer. So there's, this is just the current list of all the possible roles that I've seen on a user experience team. And again, a lot of sort of organizational things then is like, well, what is the actual name of our team? Is it user experience is the team itself? And part of that depends on, well, who are you, right? If you're on a team of UX folks and you're only focused on current customers, right? You might be called a product team or other things. But if you're more working on internal applications and all of your users are employees, then you might actually be on a team that's called the employee experience team. It's not clear. I've seen them all across the board. And then of course, for me, when I'm consulting, a lot of times it's all around who owns what, right? I just remember talking to one CTO, and he just couldn't stop talking for an hour on how he now owned user experience at his company and what he was going to do everything and how things were going to change now that he was owning it instead of, I can't remember who owned it before, marketing or whatever, right? So, but a lot of things about user experience as a team. How do we do things as a team? Both how do we get our work done, and then how do we live in this and within our organization in order to do it? So some things related to team are like how do the roles map on a team. So the graph in the upper left hand corner from the Nielsen Norman Group report, it basically says if you're a designer on a team, when they surveyed folks, if you're a designer, you're probably also a researcher. Over here, like who does user research? The designers do it 78% of the time, and the researchers do it 100%. But who does the visual design? The researcher hardly ever does the visual design. Okay, so some of those are sort of clear cut. This is just over on the right is one example where one person proposed like this is how to map the roles on a team. For them, the graphic designer did visual design, but did nothing else, right? So again, once you're thinking about user experience in the team, then you've got to worry about roles and how you assign responsibilities and how to get the work done. So these are the things that we sort of dive into more when we're thinking of user experience as a team. So let's do the next poll. Okay, let's launch this one. And so how does your organization think about their ability to do user experience activities? So this one's kind of hard. You might have to stew about it a little bit. But how would you say your colleagues think about user experience? Okay. Got about half of you in there. I know this is a hard one. Okay, anybody else want to chime in? We've got, okay. One more if you want to answer. Okay. So here's the results. And so I'm interested in sort of specific results, but I'm also interested in your reaction. Like, this seems like a weird question to ask, isn't it? So what did you even think about this question and the choices that I gave you for this one?
It's kind of a measure of the UX maturity of a team, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I'm thinking of this as different kinds of maturity. And perhaps like the top to bottom, from least mature to most mature, but maybe not. We could argue about that. What do you think some of the pros and cons of some of these different ways to think about it? So like as scientific, study it objectively, right? 3 out of 10 of you picked it. Why did you pick it? Or even like, which of you said there's no way that I can choose that for my organization?
I picked that one in addition to a couple others because the conversation, at least in other teams in my company of UX designers, is they're approaching it really removed from the users at this point in time. They're doing a lot of study of best-in-class literature. There's not a lot of conversation that's happening with their users. So it feels a bit like a clean room.
Ah, okay, right.
So very scientific.
Right, and so that could be like scientific perhaps in a bad way, right?
Exactly.
Right. Did somebody else answer scientific and think it was a good thing that their organization thought about it scientifically?
I picked scientific, and I guess I saw it in a positive light because when I joined the team, there was not a researcher. They were doing research, but they said they wanted more formalized process so they could have good evidence to back up the change.
Right.
And that's where they saw the science part of it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about this? So one person was honest and they said, easy, just be nice to users. I've been on panels and they said, like, what is user experience? This is easy, right? Just like, don't treat your users like idiots and we'll be good to go, right? And so there's definitely some positive to that. But I wonder if that's all that you do, then you often won't be able to solve the really hard problems. So, okay, let's go on. So let's see. So again, if we think of user experience as a mindset, you know, the one that triggered this one for me was somebody was on a panel and they said, UX is easy, just follow the golden rule, right? Just be nice to people. And that's good. It's like, okay, that's the beginning. But if you're a little bit more mature, then you start to think of it as a repeatable process that you can do over and over again, that you can actually bring a professional aspect to it and so on. So I think that there's some of these different mindsets. And again, I've just heard this word mindset coming up more and more. A lot of it is around design thinking, right? Design thinking gets introduced to an organization and say design thinking is just a mindset, right? And they try to get people on board with it. So for better or for worse, I've just heard this word mindset a lot lately. So I'm not sure exactly if that's a good or a bad thing. And what was one of the funny things that triggered it was I was actually while I was getting ready for this, I saw a tweet and it was about like what do you hate about something or whatever, and it was like IT people hate stupid users, and in the thread were phrases like picnic, pebcac, ID10T, and layer 8. And I had to look each of them up because I didn't know what they meant, right? But if you're in an IT organization and your job is like tech support for employees, you might say, you know, you might use the word picnic, which is, what does picnic stand for? Person in chair, not problem in chair, not in computer or something like that, right? Right. So it's like, it's these other ways to say our users are stupid. So it's still out there, even though I don't encounter it with my clients because those people don't hire me, right? But it's still out there. Maturity models, right? Somebody mentioned maturity models. This is just a little quick movie that I made of a whole bunch of maturity models out there. You can get to the details if you want to, but there's a lot of maturity models that we could talk about. So again, for these group of spins, they're really around user experience as an organizational capability. And of course, the hard part is when people ask me questions like, Keith, should we have 5 user researchers on our team or 2? It's like, I don't know, it depends, right? It depends on your maturity level, depends on your culture, depends on your business model, lots of things. So it's kind of hard to give a straight answer when somebody asks me a user experience as a team type question or as a mindset type thing. So anybody want to share, does this trigger like anything, any good story from something that you guys have been doing around user experience as an organizational capability?
Yeah, just Paul here. Yeah, just not exactly that, but I'm just making a connection between this here and the previous section on skills and tools and whatnot, because I think you don't have it here particular, but like one of your slides you had roles, and I think roles has also a lot of affinity with skills and tools and process and whatever. Like, you know, those things are sort of baked into roles basically. So they also, as you mentioned here, they're also can be viewed from the lens of organizational capability and maturity. For sure, you can look at roles and you can get a sense for how people are doing UX in that company. So I think roles maybe spans both, like this topic and the other topic. Yes,
it's one of those bridge ones, and I was like, oh, I could add a 15th spin on roles. Well, I've got enough spins already, but yes. But yeah, I think talking about the different roles on a team and who does what is a really important conversation to have with folks. Anything else? Okay, so next one more poll, and I will, this is the last poll, so if you're getting worn out, we're getting close. But good questions all along the way. So what should you study to be good at user experience? And I'm making you, right, you can only pick one. It's a hard choice. You probably want to pick 4 or 5, but you can only pick one for purposes of discussion. Okay, we've got 10 votes in, pretty good. Okay, there's the 11th one. Thank you for voting. So what should you study? We got human-computer interaction, 6 votes for that. Not super surprising, right? Given sort of the history of user experience and its roots in human-computer interaction in universities. We got a library science, a graphic design, cognitive psychology, business management. We didn't get anybody brave enough to say criminal justice, right? And so that was one of my joke ones, either because, hey, we can treat our users as criminals, but really the larger point is that, I mean, one of my clients makes software for police departments, right? And everybody on their user experience team actually had a criminal justice background, right? They were like 10 years in the criminal justice field, and then later they became user experience people, right? So for some career progressions, it's okay, go into your field of study and then use that as the subject matter expert, and then become a user experience person later, right? Versus the human computer interaction path, which is more, let's learn user experience as a practice, and then later I'll figure out, you know, because I might be working for a police department application one day, and then for an e-commerce website the next, right? So, but there's multiple career paths, multiple fields to study, right? That's the real point. So let's see. So this group of spins is around user experience beyond the organization, right? So not just what happens within your organization, but like how are you a member of a community of practice, right? Like like TorCHI, right? Who do you hang out with outside of your company in order to learn things or in order to get a job? What would you study in school, right? What can you get a PhD in or get a master's degree in? What is the actual profession, right? So, and how do we manage careers and occupations so that you might be a user researcher at one company and get another job called user researcher at the next company? Is that really the same job, or is it a very different job, even though it has the same title, right? And then talking about the industry as a whole of like how might a bunch of companies work together in order to define an ISO standard or something. So I did a little bit of, this is the sort of the part where I tried to do some research for my Canadian audience here. So I did some research online trying to find, well, where would I go to school if at different universities in Canada if I wanted to be a user experience practitioner someday. I found lots of human-computer interaction degrees inside computer science programs, right? I just didn't even bother keeping track of them all because they were all over the place, which I think is great. You know, the one at Waterloo jumped out at me because they had an HCI plus health lab, right? So they sort of combined it with something else. So in Canada, my guess is a lot of the practitioners in Canada, if we were to have them fill out a survey, they'd say they have a human-computer interaction degree. I found some other ones, of course. University of Toronto's awesome information degree. That have an information architecture course and user experience design major type things. But I found things in art and design, industrial design. I found something at the Vancouver Film School that you could study digital design and then take courses in user experience and UCD innovation. That's what they called it, user experience and UCD innovation. I'd never heard that before, right? So, but you can go to film school now and end up as a user experience person. I saw some in communication, some in psychology. UCC, do you guys know what UCC is? It's a prep school, a high school, right? And I forget where it is. It's somewhere, I think somewhere in the Toronto area. So you can go to high school and you can get an IB. I had to look up what is it?
International Bachelor.
International Baccalaureate. Thank you. I'd never heard that term before, so I'm learning. And so again, you could graduate from high school and already be on your way to a user experience career, right, with that thing. And again, you're starting to learn, they call it innovative product design. So not all of them were necessarily user experience verbatim. And then you can also see some things at the executive level, right? So again, when you think of user experience as a field of study, for me, I try to stress that it's multidisciplinary, right? We're not all coming from one place. It's not like if you want to be an accountant, you probably went to school and got an accounting degree, right? So
I talked with Carl Vredenberg, and he said at U of T alone, there's about 6 or 8 different programs that talk about
Right. So yeah, so I've studied this.
In Faculty of Medicine, I actually taught a class there. So
right.
We're all coming from different places.
Right. And so it's probably more useful to look at the University of Toronto and say, where isn't there a path to user experience, right? So good. And again, so that's just sort of a trend. And then again, if you look at this article that Jacob Nielsen wrote that says in his modeling the profession, the number of UX professionals in the world is going to grow exponentially, right? And so I think we're starting to see some of that one. But if we think of user experience as a profession, and if this curve is actually true, then like to me it feels like we're in a boatload of trouble, because right now like we're at the bottom end of this curve and we have a hard time just sort of like acting like as a professional, keeping our job titles straight and everything. And so I think we're starting to see some of these growing pains, but that's a different way to think about it, because it's looking outside of your organization. So as another example, when I talk about user experience communities, right? Where do you hang out with to learn these things and to find colleagues and to help you get jobs, and where are the mentors, right? I happen to notice in the Toronto area, there's 3 different kinds of communities which are interesting to me. One is a UX Waterloo. They call themselves an interest community, a community of interest for anyone concerned about improving the user experience, right? So I'm like, oh, well, gosh, that's probably software developers, CEOs, managers, lots of folks, right? They're trying to be very inclusive. Then UXPA Toronto, they use the term practitioner, right? Which to me means you've probably got a job and you're sort of doing this and getting paid, right? And to help you be a better practitioner. And then our beloved TorCHI actually says professional association. You guys are striving higher, right? So not just for anybody interested and not just for people doing it every day, but professional association, and you go out of your way to include academics, folks in academia and students, right? So you're like trying to cross that industry practice, industry academia boundary, right? So I just found that interesting that sort of all three communities exist. And I was involved in the 24 hours of UX a couple months ago, and it was a bunch of communities of interest, right? They're popping up all over the world as, you know, a meetup group in Africa. If you're interested in UX, join this meetup group in Nairobi, and so on. So that's part of what's happening in our world. And so I want to ask the question, we don't have time, this could be a follow-on if we need to, but like, how do we stack up? If we think of user experience as a profession, how are we doing? Do we have full-time occupations, right? So that's one requirement to be a profession, right? There's like, you know, I'd love to be a Sherlock Holmes researcher, but there just aren't any jobs in it. So we got lots of jobs, right? So we got lots of jobs. There's lots of training and certificates, right? Are they good ones or bad ones? That's another discussion, but we do have that one. We have a pretty fair number of university programs. They're still emerging, but we do have some labs and research things and so on. Bodies of knowledge. I'm not sure if I came to you and said, you know, what's the one body of knowledge that I can read? You know, give me the encyclopedia of UX that I could read, give me a month and I'll read it. And now I know everything that I need to know. Do we have a body of knowledge, or do we have multiple bodies of knowledge? So something to think about. We've got some association standards in Canada, right? Licensing, if somebody wanted to get licensed where they were actually, you know, some government agency or somebody said that they were allowed to practice, like with lawyers, right? With lawyers, that would happen at the provincial level in Canada. So I haven't heard any examples of that happening for us, but that's one sign of a profession, is that there's some group that licenses you, and if you do unethical things, they boot you out and they don't let you be one of those anymore. And recognition by government. So I did a little bit of research on recognition by government. So what do you think the Canadian government's view of user experience occupations is? Do we exist? Is there such thing as a user experience occupation? What's your guess? Well, let's peek ahead and see. So I actually spent a couple hours going through the Canadian National Occupation Classification. So there's a link down on the slide if you want to. And what they do is they categorize all the jobs, you know, all the jobs that are recognized in Canada. Level 0, I don't know why it's level 0, but level 0 are management jobs. So as I looked through all the different management jobs that were listed, the ones that were sort of close were like an 0124, which is a graphic design manager, graphic design firm manager, right? So, and there's university professors in 4011. So there's some of those in the management. When you get to the professional level, these are folks that they're like doctors and dentists and architects is what they use as examples. So I found things like an information systems analyst, a web designer. A web designer is listed as an actual web designers and developers as an occupation. And then what was most promising to me was 2174. And they used the graphic GUI designer as an example of a job title in that classification of occupations, right? So the Canadian government recognizes a GUI designer as a professional thing. That's if we were to like run a report, we could get a count of the number of 2174s that are registered somehow in Canada to get a sense of how many people there are in that occupation, right? And so there's another category of technical jobs, right? So these don't require as much education. It's sort of like a certificate type thing. And 5241 jumped out to me, and they actually use the phrase user experience designer is a possible job title for one of these 5241 categories of jobs, right? So how I interpret this is, according to the Canadian government, a user experience designer is somebody who has a little bit of training, like out of a boot camp, right? And they're sort of on this technical track, whereas a GUI designer or a web designer actually has like a 4-year degree and has some more, is a little bit more professional, right? So that's their view of it. And I don't know where it came from. I don't know who figured this out, but somebody in the Canadian government, maybe they just Googled user experience designer and they found a bunch of boot camps and they figured, oh, that sounds like a technical job, right? But 10 or 20 years ago when they created the GUI designer, there weren't any boot camps, so they called that a professional job. I'm not quite sure. So what do you think that actually the Canadian government recognizes user experience designer as an actual occupation? I was excited because in the US that doesn't exist. In the US, there's only a web designer is the closest that I can get. Does this sound encouraging or discouraging?
Encouraging,
I think I heard.
definitely.
We have a Canadian digital service. They were represented also at TorCHI, and
right.
You know, we're starting to take things seriously at
right.
provincial level as well as federal level.
Yes, right. So we have people working for the Canadian government doing user experience, right? But there's a different group that figures out all the jobs that exist. So how do we talk to them? So I was excited that I found it, but I was also discouraged because like I searched and searched and I could not find anything even close to a user researcher anywhere, right? So we've got a designer in there. I could find a survey interviewer that was an intermediate job, like a high school dropout kind of survey interviewer. I could find ethnographer of 4169. I could find an ethnographer, right? But I couldn't, and I could find some market researchers, but I couldn't find anything that I thought was even close to this concept of a user researcher, which is not quite the same. So again, if we know somebody who has pull within the Canadian government, I think, if we could have some input and maybe explain to them, the differences between the 2174 and the 5241 and get some user researcher added in there, might be good to get an information architect in there. There's some more things that we could get added. So, and again, why does this matter? It's, somewhere somebody's calculating these numbers, and if we're not on some spreadsheet with a lot of numbers in these categories, then we don't exist, right? So, according to somebody. And again, there could be funding or whatever related to these things. So anyway, so at least the Canadian government recognizes that a user experience designer exists. Hooray. So again, sort of as a summary for this collection of spins, thinking of user experience across organizations as this like a multidisciplinary scale, this is hard stuff, right? How would we get the Canadian government to change its classification for occupations? I have no idea. That's just like black magic. I don't know how that happens. But I think, we're seeing some of the problems with that because, a lot of employers, the HR folks might actually be looking at that, right? Some HR folks will be looking at that list of occupations to figure out, like, I don't understand what this occupation is. I'm going to go look at the Canadian database of occupations, and there's like no user researcher there. How are they going to write a job description? They can't do it. So we got something in the tweet or something in the chat around change agent. So cool. So we're way over on time because you guys asked good questions. So this is just sort of my summary slide. So again, hoping that some of these user experience spins trigger some interesting discussions. Some of them might help you, the next time you're having lunch, if you ever have lunch with somebody in person and you're talking about user experience, then you can tease some of these apart. Some of them may